Retro Hangover is supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We would especially like to thank our 16-bit tier subscribers, Lyle McCarnes and Ashton Ruby. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to episode 62 of Retro Hangover.
And hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we are energetically envious of ignetic entropy events in engineering. This is episode 62 of the Retro Hangover podcast. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, joined by special guest Paul Romallo of the Region Free Gamers podcast, and, as always, your host, Shane Dick Dragon Duo Express Koski.
You know, I was rooting for you in that intro there. Yeah. I was really just pulling for you because that alliteration for a minute there, I thought it was gonna drop right out, but you pulled through.
I pulled through. I noticed I did drop off.
I was impressed.
But
that's okay.
I think I pulled through. I made it. Yes.
I had no doubt myself.
So everyone.
And now you see the dynamic already amongst the three of us.
So in any case, welcome to the show, Mr. Paul Romallo. Welcome. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. Of course, I'm Paul Romallo, as has been mentioned already twice. I am a co-host on the Region Free Gamers podcast, and I'm super hyped to be here with you guys to talk TurboGrafx. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. So, as we want to do, we'll move. We use that phrase a lot. I like that. Want to do.
I think I started that, and then you just kind of picked it up.
I like it because it looks like won't, but it's said like want. In any case,
because English.
Shane, what have you been up to this week?
Man, I have been paradigm shifting like a mofo. Let me tell you what. I've been putting a lot of time into Final Fantasy 13, actually.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. That's all right. You can press F in chat if you'd like at this point. But no, actually, I've been enjoying it. So the weird thing is, right, I had a roommate right out of college, and one might think you would have a roommate in college, which I also did, but that's a different story. But the one out of college, he got FF13 like right when it came out. I didn't own an Xbox or anything at that time, and if you listened to the show before, you know I was really late to that party. But I did kind of watch him play this kind of off and on because he was in the living room chilling with this, and the thing that I gathered from it was that it is an RPG where you walk down a lot of hallways for like 20 hours and then things happen. And turns out I was not necessarily wrong. But having said that, I have enjoyed my time with it. I'm not super bummed about there not being a whole lot of open space. There is something to be said for just having an objective and getting to it. But I am happy that I'm at the point now, as of last night, as a matter of fact, at the time of this recording, that I have opened it up so that now I can choose whichever party members I want. And by that, I mean I've chosen 3 and I will never play anybody else.
It's only about 25 hours in, right?
Actually, yeah, it's right about there. Yeah. Also, I love it, too, that it's in a not so subtle way. Right about that point, they drop you into an area where, in universe, they're just like, oh, this is a place where the Fal'Cie are meant to train us. Perhaps we should stay here and make use of this. Which is basically them just being like, guess what? You got to the grinding part. Enjoy. And that's what it is.
But the combat's good enough, right? Like the grinding's not that painful.
Yeah, no, it isn't. I actually, it was weird to get into at first, but now that I got the hang of it, I actually really like the paradigm swapping system. And now that I've got the 3 characters that I really like playing with, and for the record, by the way, that's Lightning, Fang, and Hope. They're pretty good combo. Now that I got all their paradigms set up, like it's pretty smooth. So yeah, but that's actually the vast majority of what I've been doing lately. Paul, what about you? I'm gonna skip Chris because he's always here. I'm tired of talking to him. But Paul,
I'm boring.
Oh man, 62 episodes of Chris. Like, come on.
I know, right? You've only got one.
Exactly. Yeah. I was gonna go with a JRPG because I've been playing Trails of Cold Steel 2 recently. But since you went with Final Fantasy, I've actually also, man, it's kind of off-brand for me, but I've been playing Gran Turismo.
Really?
And the reason I did was because my wife and we were on a vacation recently that got cut short because of COVID, right?
Right.
So we came back and I had extra cash that we just didn't spend on the trip, right? So, a little bit of a silver lining. So I did that really stupid thing and I bought a steering wheel for the PS4.
As you do.
And oh my God, I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. Because over the years I've thought, man, you know what game I really liked when I was younger? Gran Turismo. God damn, that was good.
It was.
But I've never really played it again, right? Because like I just don't have any interest in holding a control pad and like moving the car around with my thumbs. It doesn't really, I've kind of done it already and I'm good.
Sure.
And I thought, but if I ever do play it again, I'll want to play it with a wheel. But of course, like, I'm not going to buy a wheel, right? That's, it's this albatross and it's expensive. And when am I ever going to have the money for that? So that's what I did. I went and I bought a wheel. And wow, it really is shocking how bad a driver I am. I thought, like, I magically thought that I would buy this wheel and I would just suddenly be good at GT. And it's really like aggressively the opposite. I couldn't believe how terrible I was at Gran Turismo with a wheel. It was absolutely ridiculous. So, I mean, I've been like practicing because it's a lot of money to spend to not practice. And I don't know what the verdict is yet.
Yeah, that's that sunk cost thing, right? You're like, damn, I spent all this money on this wheel. I'm going to use it.
Well, I have to, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
And I mean, to be fair, in spite of the ridiculous amount of suckage I'm bringing to the table with that game,
sure,
it's actually a lot of fun, right? Because like, it's the Logitech G29, and it's got like this really cool feedback when you turn it, and so on and so forth. Like, way more force than I actually expected. I'm actually like fighting the wheel sometimes. And so, it has this, it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. So, I'm trying to see how much my ego can take because I do enjoy it, but the losing is, oh man, it's really getting to me.
See, that story went in a completely opposite direction than I thought, because you started off with, well, we were on vacation, and then when you tied this to Gran Turismo, I thought it was going to be like, we went to Monaco, and I just saw all these cars, and I was like, damn, I got to drive one of those.
No, I just got home, I was depressed, and I spent a lot of money to make myself feel better.
Okay, now that's fair. That's more realistic.
That's the best way to cure depression is spend money.
You know what? In this instance, it wasn't terrible. And I mean, it only took a couple days after we got back to like kind of come to terms with the whole thing. Like, you guys are aware, I live up in the Yukon, and so when we got back, we still had like 6 feet of snow outside. This was, middle of March, around St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. And the very next day after we got back, my wife went to take the dog out, and she drove out to the airport because we have a really cool walking trail by there, but it's not maintained in any way. And so she got stuck in the snow with her car, and she called me, and I got into the truck, and I took the tow rope and I towed her out, and we were thoroughly miserable because we had just landed the day before. And it wasn't that long where we just kind of started laughing because, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It was only a couple of days and we were, feeling better. But that was 2 days with which I could have time to buy a wheel.
Right. So that was going to be my question. So did you buy the wheel before or after the towing incident?
I was barely off the plane.
Okay. Because they'll see, this is again, this is how my brain works, is like the first thing apart from making sure that my significant other was, okay, the next thing that would have ran through my head if I had already gotten that wheel would have been like, well, honey, what would have probably helped driving or whatever is if you had this badass wheel that I have.
Yeah, Gran Turismo is known for the driving out of the deep snow levels.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that its winching capabilities are just like way up there for sure.
Winch Turismo.
It says the real driving simulator on the box, so it's
So
true.
yeah, that's the Canadian edition of GT. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that everybody's okay.
Yeah. Everybody's, we're all doing great. We have some time off to work with here. So, everybody's healthy. Everybody's happy. We can't really ask for more.
That's good.
Awesome. And so Chris, what about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I beat the game that we both played that we're going to be doing an episode on later, so I won't mention what that one is. But if you pay attention to our Instagram account, you will know what game that is. I'm being secretive for probably no generally good reason because
we typically do that. Yeah,
I don't know. Why.
It's okay. I've cracked the code. I remember which game you're talking about,
Yes.
and I will be very happy to hear that episode.
I'm firmly team Meow, by the way.
Yes, definitely Team Meow. Meow's best kitty, called Team Meow. But then I got done with that, and I started playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it's good. I'm actually really enjoying it. So I did not think I would.
In spite of yourself?
In spite of
You
myself.
sound a little surprised.
I continue to hold my ground on a lot of the points I have made in the past on this podcast, but I will admit that in terms of how good the game is, I perhaps was a little hyperbolic in burying it. So, yeah.
Crazy.
I might actually I was thinking about going off on a certain portion of the fan base to the intro of this episode, but I didn't want to take up that much time. So I'm just going to do not a rapid fire review, but a rapid fire rant, just because it keeps the acronym the same. So I think that could work.
Clever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right on.
Great. All right. Well, if you're a 16-bit tier subscriber, then look forward to hearing Chris bitch more about Final Fantasy VII.
I'm not going to bitch about Final Fantasy VII. It's. I mean, I will, but not about the game.
Yeah, you absolutely will.
In any case, this week is a very exciting week. As you had heard earlier, we are going to be discussing the TurboGrafx, or as more popularly known, for people who bought it, the PC Engine. And we originally scheduled this back in March to try and line it up with the release of the TurboGrafx-16 or PC Engine Mini.
Yes.
Lucky for us, if you order from Amazon in the United States, it still hasn't been released. So maybe by the time this episode comes out, I'll have it. But in the meantime, yes, we are being very relevant with this. And that's why we brought in Paul. He's kind of a ringer because Shane never touched it growing up. And I briefly owned a version of one, but Paul has a lot of personal experience with it. So we're really happy for him to be on the podcast for this topic.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, I guess without any further ado, then we should probably get into our brief history. So, Chris, why don't you take it away with a little bit of some background on the PC Engine / TurboGrafx-16?
TurboGrafx-16, the next generation video game system with a performance and power to blow you away. TurboGrafx-16, turbo for speed, graphics for unbelievable graphics, with 10 times the colors of most other video games, and 16 for the high-energy 16-bit graphics processor that makes huge characters with unreal detail like you've never seen before. TurboGrafx-16, it's more than a game, it's non-stop action and awesome adventure.
What truly is 16-bit? In 1987, while bits certainly did exist and were associated with computing power, the phrase wasn't necessarily on the lips of every child playing video games. Everyone was too busy playing their Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicoms, or their microcomputers and Master Systems if you're European. NEC and Hudson Soft didn't think bits were a huge deal either, but they did believe in making quality hardware. Hudson had developed new, advanced graphics chips, but failed to sell them to Nintendo. NEC, a high-end electronics company, wanted into the market and was more than happy to take Hudson up on that opportunity. As such, they formed a joint venture of sorts to release a tiny, high-powered 8-bit system called the PC Engine on October 30th of that year. The system did contain a 16-bit graphics processing unit, but only had an 8-bit CPU. It was meant to compete with the Famicom and was a remarkable step forward in almost every aspect. Sprites were larger, more colorful, and more detailed. Games were smoother, moved faster, and generally played better. And, where it is always better to be kawaii, the games came on cute, credit card-like cartridges called HuCards. It was a smash hit, and by 1988, the PC Engine would be the best-selling home console in the Japanese market, both outselling the Famicom and Sega's newest entry, the Mega Drive. 1988 was also around the time that NEC decided it might be a good idea to bring the system to the North American market. But in the land of huge trucks and SUVs, 72-ounce porterhouses, and of course, Texas, the tiny PC Engine was not viewed as marketable. It was from a Japanese toy company that was so small, and the NES was a humongous, bulbous system. That and the 16-bit war was brewing. Sega was beginning to hype the Genesis in North America, and the fact it was 16-bit. The PC Engine needed to be repackaged as something larger, more extreme, more American. So the extreme name of the TurboGrafx-16 was decided on. NEC chose to emphasize the 16-bit GPU for the system's name in an attempt to place it on the same level as Sega's Genesis. After all, even though the PC Engine had a lead of a full year over the Mega Drive in Japan, the TurboGrafx and the Genesis would be launching at almost the same time in North America. On August 29, 1989, the TurboGrafx-16 would be released in New York and Los Angeles, 2 weeks after the Genesis had landed. This was the beginning of the Turbo's problems. Initial advertisements for the Turbo tried to make the NES's direct competitor, much like Sega had. Unfortunately, Sega also was attacking the Turbo, pointing out that the Sega was a true 16-bit system unlike its competitor. NEC also chose to include the game Keith Courage and Alpha Zones as a packing game, a game based on the anime Spirit Hero Wataru that no American would know. This was a stark contrast to Sega's Pack-In, a near-perfect console port of the popular arcade title Altered Beast. While Keith Courage wasn't a terrible game, and maybe even the better of the two, its total obscurity and the fact it wasn't any sort of Super Mario level of quality, or even the best game available for the console at launch, made for a terrible pack-in choice. Lastly, there was the price. Even though the TurboGrafx had older hardware and wasn't as powerful as the Genesis, you'd still be paying $10 more than Sega's offering, costing $199 at launch. These and other factors, including the fact it only had one controller port and only had RF output, led to NEC's little Turbo that couldn't fade far behind Sega very quickly. The TurboGrafx-16 was a disaster, and was so bad that the plans for a European release were binned. By March 1991, only 750,000 TurboGrafx-16 units were sold in the United States, the same number that were produced for its initial production run. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The PC Engine was still seeing moderate success in Japan, and would go on to outsell the Mega Drive in total sales. While the North American library would prove to be somewhat disappointing, there were quite a few gems that could be found, including ports of popular Sega titles. In Japan, plenty of great games were being released, including third-party support from companies like Konami, Namco, and Capcom that would make the system popular among importers. The system would be the first home console to have a CD add-on that would be released in all regions in 1988, which many would associate inseparably from the actual PC Engine itself. The add-on would eventually be combined with the core system itself in the form of the Turbo Duo in 1991 in Japan and 1992 in North America. NEC would also release a fully portable version of the system called the Turbo GT or Turbo Express in 1990, which would also be a battery destroyer. The PC Engine and TurboGrafx-16 were both officially discontinued in 1994, with its successor, the PCFX, flopping so terribly it would have been envious of even the Virtual Boy. Total sales over its life were around 6 million, with 4 million units being sold in Japan alone. Despite its perceived failure in the United States, it still managed to push 2 million units in the region and developed a cult following that continues to grow to this day. While it's hard to gauge the true legacy that NEC and Hudson's effort left behind, there's no denying that it had a place for all fans of the generation, and will always be 16-bit to us. And that is your brief history of the TurboGrafx-16 and PC Engine.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for that brief, not so brief history. I think that's actually one of our more elaborate ones. We covered a lot there. I like that. I don't want to go too far into any, one detail about something because I know we have a runtime we like to stick to, and there is a lot to talk about here with
Absolutely.
the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx.
Yeah.
But can we just for a second, because this is the first thing that popped out to me. Keith Courage, what's the deal with that? Right?
Oh man.
Okay, so let me. I played that for a little bit, right? And given that it was the pack-in, not only could I not see why that was decided on to be a pack-in title in North America, but B, am I the only one that thinks that the only good part of that game is when you're actually in your mecha suit because the rest of it controls like ass? Is that just me?
To be fair, the best part of any game that involves mecha is the part where you're in the mecha suit.
Absolutely true.
Touché. I'll give you that one. But seriously, like the first level of that game I was playing, I'm like, all right, this is okay. This is all right. And then you get in your suit and I'm like, why is the whole game not like this?
And that's a very fair criticism.
It's unbelievable.
It should have focused more on the mecha portions. And me and Paul actually had a little bit of a back and forth on this on social media, where I still claim that Keith Courage is a better game than Altered Beast as a total package.
And I mean, like, yeah, I guess, kind of, but but at the time, it was no contest, right? Like, the fact that Altered Beast was an arcade game and it was popular there, that was really kind of the deciding factor, right? Like, as a game itself, I think you could go either way, but Altered Beast had that name recognition, which, again, bad game or not, right? People saw it in the arcades, it looked spectacular, and that was that.
Oh, and the port was so clean for the Genesis, where what the fuck is Keith Courage?
Oh my god. Like, you guys know that was named after Keith Schaefer, the NEC, I think it was the CEO at the time in North America. Mm-hmm. I couldn't believe it when I read that. They were like, let's impress our boss and name this terrible game after him.
Apparently he was happy with it.
Yeah, that worked out real well. I mean, at least the same thing happened with Kirby, but that one turned out infinitely better.
Oh my goodness.
But, Nintendo wasn't relying on Kirby.
Well, true. That is true.
And it was a Game Boy title. This is the first title for your flagship console. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely
It's incredible.
Right. What the fuck? So, okay, so what do you guys think should have been the packing game? I only really see two options that you really could have gone with.
Okay.
And my belief is R-Type or the Legendary Axe. Because I've always said Blazing Lasers, but apparently there's conflicting information to say that Blazing Lasers was really a launch game.
Yeah, and I would put, like, as a game, I would put Blazing Lasers above R-Type. I don't think there's really too much question about that. Uh-huh. I mean, you might have a preference one way or another, but it's apples and oranges. R-Type is the one with the name recognition. So you could go with Legendary Axe because it's a better game. You could go with R-Type because it's still really good. And it was a fantastic arcade port, like really, really solid. Probably the best one out of all the 16-bit ports that were out there.
Absolutely. Especially, It was way better than the Master System port.
Oh, man, like night and day.
Blew it away. And I think the ultimate backbreaker, for it was the fact that it did come out around the same time as the Genesis, so it couldn't even say, hey, well, look, we're better than the Master System. And Sega would be like, yeah, we know. We are now too.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we can all just be glad that China Warrior was not the pack-in title. For being honest.
But those sprites, man, those sprites were gigantic.
That was the driving advertisement.
Oh man, listen, despite everything Chris talked about as far as Texas and porterhouse steak, size is not always everything. And China Warrior is a good example of that. Now,
yeah, great screenshots though. Great screenshots.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's perfect YouTube fodder. Also, there are plenty of Let's Players that got some mileage out of that game for sure. But
oh yeah,
yeah. But I don't know, man. Like, if I had to pick a pack in for it, I mean, I do agree with Paul that I think R-Type would be the sensible choice, just given the vast amount of name recognition that it would have over pretty much anything else. But if I was going to be completely insular and selfish about it, I probably would have picked Dungeon Explorer, honestly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It really is another good choice.
Yeah, it's a good game.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, they probably could have gone with even like Alien Crush and then just been like, look at this sweet ass pinball game we've got. And I feel like that would have been better than Keith Courage.
It's certainly accessible. I mean, I'll give it that. And Dungeon Explorer would have probably pushed a few more people to pick up some of those turbo taps too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Which was a really dumb decision in and of itself. I get it for Japan, though. If you look at the PC Engine, if you look at how everything was designed, the small form factor, I'm thinking people are mostly playing these games by themselves in the room. It probably, cost-benefit analysis, they're going to not have a second controller port, especially when you're looking how they're advertising it.
Well, and so for the lovely listeners at home, why don't you expand on exactly what that tap was supposed to be?
What's that? The Turbo Tap?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was supposed to make it you could play just more than one player because the actual TurboGrafx only came with one controller port.
Yeah, no, I just wanted you to be specific about that because some listeners may not know you're referring to what a Turbo Tap is without giving any context. But the context is important because that is fucking bananas. That when you put that up next to any of the other consoles that were on the market at the time, at least in North America, requiring somebody to buy an additional accessory to be able to even play with another person is insane.
Especially at a time where people, I think in general, were less knowledgeable about the hardware they were purchasing. Nowadays, I don't think anybody goes out, and this probably ended with the Wii, I suppose, but I don't think anybody goes out and buys a console without having a pretty good idea of what they're getting into. But back then, you're getting this Christmas present for your kid. You don't know. You don't know that he's not going to be able to play it with his brother right out of the box and that they're going to be fighting and you have to break them up.
That is true. I would think that, I don't know. I feel like that still happens on some level. There's always going to be parents out there that are just going to be like, I don't know, Billy said he wants that PlayStation 1 box, whatever it is. I don't know. It's got the Fortnite.
Gosh, you're right.
But I mean, seriously.
Better than the Wii Mini.
Or the Wii U.
No, I feel attacked.
For context, if you haven't listened to the show very often, the Wii U is Chris's favorite console ever of all time, and it is sacrosanct, and no one can ever say anything bad about it.
It's perfect.
It's amazing, because when I listen to your guys' show, I agree with Chris reflexively on almost everything he says. And then he talks about the Wii U, and I'm like, oh yeah, he is like a different person than me. Okay, that's cool.
It's so perfect. No one should insult the Wii U.
Oh God. I'm actually surprised we somehow haven't done a Wii U episode yet.
It's not retro yet.
No, that's true. I guess it doesn't fall in it. We did the Wii episode though. And
yes,
you tried really hard not to talk about the Wii U. And I'll give you credit
I didn't.
for
I
that.
didn't try really hard. I tried really hard to force in the Wii U. Don't give me any credit.
Fine. I was trying to be nice, but all right.
I'm not being nice.
Fuck you too, Chris. Whatever.
Wii U for life.
Oh God. All right. So anyway, that's one of the several things on a checklist of items that sort of spelled, doom for this in North America. Having a tap to play multiplayer was certainly not a selling point.
And let's kind of stay on that as well, because that wasn't the only add-on that you needed in order to get the most out of the system. And I'm not talking about the CD, and we'll get to the CD in a moment. I mean, the CD was a mark of technological advancement. It was something that no one had ever seen before. So I can understand that. But in order to get composite output, for those who don't know what composite output is, that's the yellow, red, white output, which came standard on the NES, mind you. And by the time the TurboGrafx-16 came out in North America, Japan had the core graphics, which standard was composite output. So for them to come out in the United States, if you wanted composite output, you had to buy a $100 attachment called the Turbo Booster.
I can't stop shaking my head, man. It's going to twist right off.
So while NEC Japan was doing everything better, I won't say they were doing everything right, but they were doing things better. They're getting success at what they were doing. NEC America had no idea what they were doing. And Paul added some notes here to kind of explain why that was.
Yeah, the recruiting on NEC America's end was not great. You know, you've got people coming from Atari, which very famously, I wouldn't say flopped because the 2600 was a success, but you have a lot of people who are behind the release of the 5200, which was just a freaking disaster. And hey, let's bring these guys over. You know, they've been in the industry, they know what they're doing. But no, not really. Not really. They brought in Keith Schaefer to head the whole operation, Ken Wirt, Bob Faber. These were all former Atari employees. And, you know, call me crazy, but like I want to hire people. I want to headhunt people from Nintendo, for example. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just let's go hire the people that were responsible for the entire crash of the North American market in 1983. That's a smart business decision.
Hey, listen, man, Atari brought it back around because, you know, just a few years ago, you could buy an Atari Hat with speakers built into it.
Are you serious?
I am not shitting you.
What was the point of this hat?
To be badass.
Isn't it called a headset?
Obviously. No, because if you're going to wear a big like Atari cap with speakers built into it, the whole purpose of that is to blare your music to everyone else that doesn't want to hear it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's it, man. Like, listen, they are innovators, if nothing else. Okay.
You know who else was innovators? NEC Japan. They were actual innovators. Maybe too much. But they made some cool shit.
But they didn't have a speaker hat, is what I'm saying.
No, you're right. They did not. Well, not that you know of. You don't know that they didn't. Maybe.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
Hudson may have done it. The Japanese release some cool and weird shit, dude. They may have it. You might get a hat with a Hudson B on it that can blast speakers.
Oh man, now I just want like a winter cap, like in the shape of a Hudson B or something. That's a missed opportunity.
Oh man, I'd buy that in 2 seconds.
Right?
Absolutely. And then Konami would use the money to make more pachinko machines.
Hell yeah.
But so meanwhile, while NEC in America was fucking things up, NEC Japan was doing some cool shit with the PC Engine. So they came out with a million different variations of it. First, as already mentioned, you had the Core Graphics, which upgraded the PC Engine from having only RF out to Composite Out. It came out with the Core Graphics 2, which just made it look different with orange font. Then you had like cool weird things like the PC Engine Shuttle, which looked like a spaceship. The Super Graphics was supposed to be an upgraded PC Engine, which flopped terribly, but it looks like a car engine and is pretty cool. And then you got the really cool Turbo Duo, which did come out in the United States, or PC Engine Duo, which combined the PC Engine and the PC CD into one unit. And you did have that kind of previously because the add-on made it look like one unit. I actually prefer the look of the add-on to the Turbo Duo just because it comes in a suitcase. It looks very, I don't know, I just like the look. I don't know what it is. But it combined it well before Sega did with the Sega CD and the Sega Genesis and the whatever you want to call, like the Sega CDX or the JVC XI or whatever the case might be, the Wonder Mega. But they were doing a lot of cool shit with the PC Engine Japan that we never got to see here in North America.
Okay, so here's my question. Well, actually, first of all, quick side tangent. You know, if you took a Super Graphics, if it looks like a car engine, and you pair that up with Paul's steering wheel, he's like well on his way to crafting his very own car.
Oh, I did it all wrong.
That's how you stop finishing last in Gran Turismo, Paul, is you have to put the Super Graphics in front of your TV.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I wish I had a Super Graphics just so I could take the picture of it, like duct taped to my PlayStation 4 and send it to you guys.
Well,
man.
if you ever get one, please do that. I want.
I will.
Want to see it. But no. So my question to both of you, because you're going to be more knowledgeable about this than me, but was it completely a failing on NEC America's part, or was it more like they were handed something that was just terribly behind like the curve for various reasons, and they had to figure out what to do with it?
Paul, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, this is a tough one because it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? Because you've got NEC America initially messing things up terribly. Like there's no halfway about it. And, for us now, it makes for a really good story. Like, nobody cares what happened to the Super Nintendo. It came out, it was successful, whatever. The failures are actually much more interesting, which is, I guess, why we're here.
The Nintendo PlayStation.
And, well, yeah, exactly, right? So you have NEC America kind of messing things up right off the bat. And we'll get into the details about that in a moment. But then once they stumbled out of the gate, then you have NEC Japan kind of getting a feeling that this is not going to go well and withdrawing support. And so, it's a bit of both, I would say.
I would say the biggest failure on NEC America, if we're kind of getting more into the weeds on this, is trying to make sure that the backplate was of the right specifications. So
brutal.
If you've ever seen a TurboGrafx-16, Shane, and if anyone's seen it, if you're not familiar with it, there's this backplate on the back of the TurboGrafx that when you take it off, it makes the TurboGrafx look like it needs to. Makes it look like a Tetris piece, essentially, and it essentially was, because they were preparing it for the Turbo CD. That's the entire purpose of it. But the backplate itself was just a giant piece of rubber, which caused the system to be delayed for months. How many months? I never saw specifically. I think maybe it was like six months plus in this delay.
Yeah, I'm going to say minimum 6, yeah.
Minimum of 6, but I couldn't find any information that specifically said how many months it was delayed. But those months had to have killed them in getting it over here, when you had to worry about Sega with a technically more powerful console breathing down your neck. And especially, like Paul said, the marketing money that NEC Japan would not provide because it wasn't making a return on their investment. And Sega had a brilliant marketing campaign that NEC just did not. It was disastrous, especially when you're competing against something that is that much technically better than what you have.
Sure. And like anecdotally, right, because I suppose I would be the perfect case study for this. If you're talking about kids back then, an exposure to the different consoles that might have been available at the time, I can 100% say from my own point of view, and of course, granted, this is, let's just say this is a few years after, because the release of this thing, right? Like I was only, if you came out in like 1988, 89 or something like that, I was like 3 or 4 years old, right? But
right.
Even a few years after that, I was already getting into that age range where, I started playing my first console systems. And then even through the next several years after that, and up until maybe when I was in my 20s, I hadn't even heard of a TurboGrafx-16, like at all. And if I had ever heard a mention of it or the PC Engine or anything like that, I just assumed it was some weird foreign console that was never over here and nobody knew anything about, because no one I knew had one. No one I knew talked about it. And I never once recall seeing a commercial or an ad spot or a billboard or anything for this console back in the day. And so, when you're going up against these two behemoths that are Nintendo and Sega, and they have these massively successful marketing campaigns for their respective consoles, regardless of whether or not your console performs better in some cases, and I will be the first to say that there are definitely some ways that the TurboGrafx outperformed both of those consoles. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if nobody knows it exists.
So Paul, you from what I understand, you grew up with this. You owned it from near launch. I don't know exactly when, but you grew up with it probably much better than we did. When did you first get your first TurboGrafx-16?
Well, funnily enough, I actually didn't have it at launch, and I didn't have it until the Turbo Duo was released. So when I first saw it, it was actually the first 16-bit console that I had ever played. I played it at my cousin's house. He had one. We played Blazing Lasers, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I have to have one. Mm-hmm. And a few weeks later, I found out that Phantasy Star 2 was available on the Genesis. Or, coming out for it, rather. And I was like, well, that's that, right? I mean, I got to get a Genesis instead, right?
Screw that other
So
one.
Pretty much, yeah. So what ended up happening was a few years later, a buddy of mine had a TurboGrafx, and he had the CD add-on for it. And he's like, yo, you got to check this out. And we played East Book 1 and 2. And I was looking into the future. And I was like, well, gotta have this. And so I think I had an SNES at the time. And I was kind of, done with it. The games weren't really appealing to me anymore. I'd played Final Fantasy 4 and 6 and Star Fox and so on, and played the crap out of Street Fighter. So traded in the SNES, got a Turbo Duo, and that's kind of where my exposure started with it. It was mainly because of the CD games. I kind of worked my way backwards with the Hue card stuff, which, while not as technically impressive as the CD games, still quite a few gems in there on the Hue card side.
And despite the fact that you ultimately didn't end up getting your a TurboGrafx, I would also probably make the argument that it was probably a good thing that your first introduction to it was Blazing Lasers, of all things. And maybe not, I don't know, Keith Courage.
We didn't even play Keith Courage once. Not even once. I'll never forget. I went over to my cousin's place. We played Blazing Lasers, and we played Battle Royale, which, not the greatest game, but 2 players wrestling, it's going to be fun, no matter how bad it is.
Sure.
And Keith Courage just sat there. He's like, don't play this.
So that's funny. My first experience with the TurboGrafx, I actually played quite a bit of Keith Courage, and I actually enjoyed Keith Courage, which is funny.
I'm sorry.
So, okay. My kind of first experience with this is, I kind of mentioned this in a previous episode. We had a after school, I guess, sitter, this after school care that we went to that was close to my elementary school. So this had to be around, third grade, 92, 93 time frame. So this is right around the time that the TurboGrafx was kind of on its death throes, and it was offering there's had to been, they got it right after Bonk's Revenge came out, when it was around there, like the $100 deal with Bonk's Revenge, not the one with like Arizona, but because I could tell what games they have looking back at it. But they had Bonk's Revenge, Splatterhouse, World Class Baseball, Final Lap Twin, and Keith Courage and Alpha Zones, of course. And actually, that was one of the games we enjoyed. Oh, and Bomberman, because, of course, Bomberman. And
oh, yeah.
Those were the games that I got really introduced to on the Turbo. They didn't have a multi-tap, by the way. No multi-tap with Bomberman. It was all one-player experience. It's very strange. But that's where I started to develop a love for the system. And eventually, I think I was 10, so this had to be in 94, 95. I wanted to play the Turbo again, because we weren't at the aftercare anymore. I was in like 6th grade, went on to middle school. I couldn't walk to the daycare anymore. So I started going home. So I think for my birthday, I ended up getting a Turbo Express with about 15 games.
Whoa. So
that's how I ended up playing it. It actually came with a converter to play Street Fighter 2 Dash.
Damn, man. How did you... Who had the knowledge to get you this?
It was just... What's that?
It was his dad. It's his dad. It's always his dad. If you listen to any of this, it's like he was like the bougie kid that always got like all the really awesome consoles. He brings up,
like, I thought
one Christmas, he brings up all the time about him and his siblings. They're like, we got like 3 consoles on Christmas Day. And I'm like, wow, what's it like to be the 1%, Chris? I'd like to know.
And I knew about the 3 systems. I knew about the Saturn, PlayStation, and 64.
Yep.
But like a modified Turbo, this is next level.
No, it wasn't modified. It came with a one of the converters, the external converters that you had to plug in, and then you'd plug in the chip to that.
Good God.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
and a TV tuner.
Oh yeah, because you have to, man. You got to watch that TV on your.
You have to watch
on your little screen.
You have to watch the TV.
Got to kill your eyes.
But yeah, I remember it specifically, and yes, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why I picked that. I just knew that there was a Turbo Express, and it was on eBay. I'm like, holy shit, we got to get that. My mom's like, yeah, sure, bid. I'm like, okay. I don't care. Fine. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those anymore. I wish I did, because holy shit, I don't want to buy any of those.
Oh man, this is the lament of every kid who grew up with that stuff.
Man.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's true. I won't forget the day that we ended up giving away our NES to some other kid in the neighborhood when we upgraded to something else, and I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
On the silver lining to my anger is that the Turbo Express stopped working because the capacitors in them were shit. In fact, that's kind of a common theme with a lot of NEC products from that time. A lot of them have to be recapped.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So I'm curious, before we jump into kind of the next topic about this that we wanted to touch on, which is the games. I'm curious about your takes on this, and this is directed to both of you. Do you feel like this, at least in my opinion, extreme fracturing of like a console base with the just bevy of different versions of this console that came out in different places, do you think that had a negative effect overall on the sales? Because, and the reason I ask that really is because, you look back at even, I mean, again, going back to Chris's baby, the Wii U, I mean, even then, that was a result of bad marketing and not enough differentiation, right? And so you had really poor sales because a lot of parents who were not as informed about the things going on in the game industry, because why would they be, thought that it was just like some different version of the Wii that they didn't need. So if you have that kind of problem with just two consoles, I feel like it's not a huge leap to say that when you end up with, what the hell even do we have here? 8 something different versions, I'm ballparking, of this thing over time. Like, that has to be confusing for the consumer market, right?
It would be more confusing, I think, for the Japanese market.
Yeah.
And something like the Super Graphics, for example, would definitely leave a bad taste in the consumer's mouth. Like, you get this system, and then only 8 games come out for it that are specifically for that system. It's not so great, in spite of, how great it looks and how you could seamlessly even fit it into your car. But right. That's not a good look for them. I mean, in the US, in North America, a little bit less, I think, of a problem. Honestly, I'd say the problem was more the unexpected add-ons, the turbo booster, the turbo tap, that kind of stuff can really irk people, like they feel like they're getting nickeled and dimed a little bit.
Sure.
But either way, probably not the best decisions.
So in terms of market fracturing, I agree with Paul, because it'd be much more fractured in Japan than it was in North America. But I even challenged like the Japanese market fracturing, just because they did embrace the CD add-on. So if you had a PC engine, you just slap that thing into the the CD add-on, and it was just seamless. It just went right in there. And if you adopted with the Core Graphics or the Core Graphics 2, or even the Super Graphics, there was an add-on that you could get everything that you could with the Turbo Duo. The only one that you really couldn't was the shuttle, and that's why the shuttle failed, is it didn't have an external connection. It was geared towards kids, even though the controller looked like a Batwing, which is pretty cool. I would say the biggest reason that NEC just couldn't figure it out, and Paul said this too, is all the add-ons, nickeled and diming. That was a factor in North America. But I really don't think they attracted the right market. Right off the bat, Sega's appealing to the arcade heads because they're Sega. That's their branding. They're in the arcade.
Right.
People know who they are. And having R-Type, the best version of R-Type available at the time, that should, that not being the pack-in, or having something that really set it apart from the Famicom and Altered Beast with Legendary X. They didn't do that. And by the time they had a mascot, the system itself just didn't take off. And it's not to mention, again, Paul destroyed me for this in the Region Free Gamers Hot Take episode for the Dreamcast, but I'll take this position for the TurboGrafx. Even today, it's not the best system between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. It's not. Like, if there's any system I'm going to choose out of the 3, the TurboGrafx isn't going to be my first one. It just doesn't have the gaming library to support that the other 2 systems did. So if I'm a parent, I'm going out, what does little Timmy want? Little Timmy wants the system with Sonic. Little Timmy wants the system with Mario. What do you have on Turbo?
Keith Courage.
They don't even know. Keith Courage.
You had nothing. You had nothing until Bonk.
Yeah.
And Bonk did provide them with a little bit of a bump. But it was obviously too late by then.
Yeah. Not to mention so a lot of their best games too, you have Bomberman, and Bomberman's great. That could have been a fun little party game. But it was still on Super Nintendo. Bonk was on the NES. What was Hudson doing? Adventure Island was on the Nintendo, a big time Nintendo game that a lot of Nintendo fans know about. What were they doing? They were, it was like subterfuge.
I say to be fair, New Adventure Island is actually a pretty solid game.
Right, but you see the point I'm trying to make. Hudson was undermining NEC.
Sure. Yeah.
Which seems bizarre. I mean, Hudson did very, very well with the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx. I mean, you guys have it noted here. They made royalties on the systems even being manufactured. Forget about sell-through. Hudson was making royalties for every system and HuCard that was manufactured. That's insane.
Right.
So it's so bizarre to me that they would kind of undermine this system that they have such a heavy hand in. On the other hand, though, they're making out like bandits, and I guess they have shareholders, so that's that.
Yeah. I don't know how they managed to ink that deal, by the way, but I mean, good on them for that. I mean, that's
they're Jedis.
Crazy. Yeah. All right. So I feel like we've touched a lot on, some of the shortcomings of the console, whether that be the weird hardware things or some of the lack of software in the library. Let's talk a little bit more on the positive side of things now, because I think that'd probably be a better way to close this out. And I know, despite everything we'd said, Paul is a huge fan of the TurboGrafx, or so I am told, anyway. And so
you weren't lied to.
Okay, well that's good. I never quite know, with Chris especially.
I'll start lying to you then. I'll make a note of
about
that.
Some of our top games, and I know that's hard. But prior to this episode, each of us took a little bit of time and thought about what maybe our top three, and in no particular order necessarily, but our top three games are out of the TurboGrafx library. And if there's one that kind of stands out above the rest, we might take a little bit to drill down into that a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and let Paul start with this one because I think he's got some interesting choices.
Yeah, I'm not going to go necessarily with my top three, but definitely some interesting ones. We've talked about on the Region Free Gamers show, we've talked about the TurboGrafx, several times. It just kind of comes up because, I'm on the show. So maybe some that I haven't talked about there. And, one that I haven't mentioned there, which is just a fantastic retro game now, is Bloody Wolf. And first of all, have you guys heard or played it?
I actually have not. No.
Well, if you guys want to play a solid retro game, because when I think of retro games, I'm not going to go back and play, for example, a role-playing game that I've never played. Right, I'll fire up the SNES and I'll play Final Fantasy IV all day long,
right?
Because I played it when I was a kid. But I'm not going to play, I don't know, Illusion of Gaia, for example. I never played that, so I don't really think I'm going to have time for it now.
You're not jonesing for that Robo Trek, Paul?
Sadly, no, I'm not. There's only so much time in the day.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, now you want something that, if you're looking for a new game, I think that you're probably going to want something that's very playable right off the bat, that is not going to crush your soul with its difficulty. And Bloody Wolf is kind of the ideal game for that. The only shortcoming of it is that it's only a single player. The arcade game was 2 players, so they kind of messed up on that account. But it's a little bit of Akari Warriors, a little bit of Contra, and it's also a little bit ridiculous. And you combine all these things and it's just so much fun. You have parts in the game where you're riding a motorcycle and you can jump. The motorcycle, just same frame, it just flies into the air. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that's, as they do, yes.
Exactly. So, that would be my choice. Great soundtrack too. It's a good looking game. Music's awesome. There's actually a plot that is really, if you can go back in time and put your 10-year-old pants on, the plot is awesome. You have to save the president.
Nice.
And I'm not going to spoil it, but it takes a few twists and turns that are unexpected. And it has also a script that is just, it's like 16-bit perfection. You get to the final boss and the main character, he says, "Time for revenge." And I'm like, yes, it is.
It is that time. You're right.
Yes. And when you beat the final boss, he simply says, "I lost, ... and then he explodes. It's great.
I mean, of course, because, okay, this is actually, I think I've brought this up at least one time before on previous episodes, but can we please just bring back bosses exploding for no reason in video games? Can that be a thing again? Because I really miss that. I'm not going to lie.
The hyper-realism is overrated. I know people
really
bleed.
is.
It's cool. Like, I understand this. Exploding people, on the other hand, that I don't see very often.
Oh, man. So, okay, this might be, I might be admitting my ignorance a little bit on this one, and it's going to be on public record, so that's cool. But is this the game where it says like something about you needing to be bad enough dudes to save the president?
No, that's Bad Dudes.
No, that's, funnily enough, that's Bad Dudes.
Oh,
Yeah.
damn it. All right. I was like, this sounds exactly like that, but okay, yeah.
No, back then, I mean, the president was constantly in trouble. I don't know what was wrong with your security.
Well, Reagan almost did get shot, so I mean, you did have a base in
that's
reality
true.
for that.
Fair enough.
No, he did get shot, not almost. He did get shot.
I mean,
I don't
you
know why
also
I'm
gotta
laughing.
remember-
That's not funny.
I tried hard not to laugh. I desperately wanted to.
I mean, but you also have to remember, like, I mean, if you look at the cover art for this game, a lot of these type of games, I mean, obviously Contra, for sure, were all heavily influenced by, things like Rambo, for instance. So all of that stuff with that, like, mid to late 80s machismo sort of action hero type stuff, like, that is front and center in a lot of these things. And typically it's like cheesy in the best possible way. And it looks like this is pretty much right up that same alley.
Exactly. Yeah, it's super fun for what it is. Like, I'm looking at that cover right now. Man, I am so I just want to like work out. I want to go bench things.
Kill some vagina faced aliens.
Yeah. That completely makes sense with everything else that led up to that. You're right. Yep. I mean, again, for what it's worth, I also, and I don't know what caused it. I'm going to say probably Alien or something, but I do really appreciate that like weird, like body horror aesthetic that a lot of games around this time had. And I don't know why they all seemed to choose that, but I was totally into it. So we can bring that back too. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm
I
good
want
with that.
Weird floating brains and with claws.
I'm all about that. And the pizza
Yeah.
monsters from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Need to bring
Yes,
this back too.
absolutely. Yeah.
Before we move on, if you want to take the next one, Shane, I just want to point out two things very briefly
Sure.
about Bloody Wolf and what Paul said. First thing is, I tried getting this game for the PC Engine because I got a PC Engine recently and realized the PC Engine version of Bloody Wolf is more expensive than the North American version of Bloody Wolf. I don't know why that is.
No idea.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Maybe I just had a bad roll of the dice because I really want that game for the system. I've heard nothing but good things. I've just never played it. And the second thing is, even with as great as the music was when everything went to CD, HuCard soundtracks were amazing for everything for all the limitations that the Turbo had and what the games came on.
Yes.
It still blows my mind.
Yeah, you were capable of great things with the Genesis, but most of the developers just weren't up to it. Yuzo Koshiro could squeeze a lot out of the Genesis, make it sound fantastic, but it seems like on average, the TurboGrafx games, they just sound better for the most part, I think, than the Genesis games. Obviously, the SNES is in a league of its own, but some of those HuCard soundtracks are really, really good, and they just sound good.
Oh, absolutely. I love them. In any case, so Shane, am I going in or are you going in? Who's next on the top three?
You know what? I'll go ahead and take it. That's fine.
Okay.
So I guess I'll follow along with Paul and not necessarily touch on a top three right now, but the one that I kind of wanted to focus a little bit more in on out of those, it was actually somewhat related to Bloody Wolf in that it's like at least tangentially military, but Military Madness. This one was a surprise for me, and of course, in the sake of full transparency, if it wasn't already obvious, I was coming to this library of games much, much later than everybody else because
A week
that's
ago.
that's my MO for most things, actually, unless it was something Nintendo. because I lived in a Mario bubble for most of my young life. But it was a super big surprise to me because I went into it not knowing anything about it, but it was something that Chris actually suggested to me, I believe. And I was like, all right, well, let me check this out. It's probably another shmup because holy shit, this system has all the shmups. And it was not. Like once I got through the intro cinematic and everything, I was like, okay, yeah, future apocalypse, whatever, people are fighting for resources, and I guess we're on the moon or something. I don't know. Okay. And then I see an overhead map with a hex grid and units I could move around. And I was like, oh man, this is a tactical combat game. This is great. And I think out of all of and I'm going to say I've probably put at least a little bit of time into a good 20-25 TurboGrafx games over the last couple of weeks, just trying to get a good sense of its library. I think this one is probably the one I put the most time in because I just really enjoy that style of combat. It's part of the reason that I'm a pretty big fan of like Final Fantasy Tactics. But this one feels a lot like what would end up being Advance Wars. It seems very similar to that. And I really dig it. Like it's pretty straightforward. You've got, your typical tank units and then, infantry and those sorts of things. But you also have to take into account like the terrain because that gives you percentage bonuses to your chance to hit and like damage and your defense and all that stuff. So you have to be very tactical about how you're positioning yourself on the map. And of course, some units are stronger than others. And it also does that thing where the longer a unit survives, the more sort of, commendations it gets, which is basically like experience for all intents and purposes. But of course, when you lose a unit, it's just gone. So I guess it's a little kind of Fire Emblem-y in that way, I guess. But I had a lot of fun with it. And it is difficult. I will say that. It's not a pushover. And you do have to be very tactical about how you approach the AI. Ultimately, your goal is to try to capture the enemy base with one of your infantry units. They're the only ones that can do it. And of course, they're the squishiest, so you have to try to get them there safely. But yeah, man, I had a really good time with that one. I had some other ones that I enjoyed, but that tactical combat just kind of spoke to me, and it was a pleasant surprise.
It's a great game. I would say the beauty of that game really lies in its simplicity. It's not over the top. It's not flashy. I mean, tactical games generally aren't, but still, there aren't any wide-eyed anime characters and so on and so forth. So you just kind of dive right in, and they released this game again. I think they actually released the sequel on the PlayStation in North America as Nectaris, but that game is almost unplayable because it's a 32-bit game on the PlayStation, and therefore it has load times. So you play it on the TurboGrafx, and it's quick, man. Like, you just start playing, and it's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just drops you right in. And, you could say, and of course you have to take this with a grain of salt, right? Because I'm going into it without the benefit of having like a chunky instruction manual sitting next to me or anything like that. So I'm sure the original experience may be a little bit different. But when you get thrown into these retro games without any context, sometimes it's super off-putting. But even with a tactical combat game like this, it's actually pretty straightforward, and you can select any of your units, and there's actually a guide built right into the game that you can just bring up anytime you want, and it'll give you all the vital statistics about that unit, what it can do, its range, its damage and defense, like all that stuff. Even some flavor text for them, actually. So it's pretty much the whole package. So like I said, I was pretty pleasantly surprised with how that turned out.
Cool.
So Chris, what about yours?
Okay. So I'll go with my top three, or just, again, they're not my top three games on the system, but they're three games I just want to mention.
Sure.
So I'll start out by saying Final Lap Twin, which is a fun little RPG racing game. So Paul, if you're having any inner conflict about not playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake while you're playing Gran Turismo, you can just drop them both and go to Final Lap Twin and feel better about yourself.
Oh my God, that's so efficient.
There you go. It's not like it's the perfect melding of both. You'll feel better about yourself once you do it. I guarantee it. Not really. Anyway, but it was really cool for the time. But I'll move on from that because that's the game I want to highlight. The second game I want to highlight is World Class Baseball. And you might, why a baseball game?
Indeed.
It's the only baseball game, first of all, on the TurboGrafx. And it was really simple. It's just a real simple baseball game. It has cute little kawaii little baseball players. And that's one of the games I constantly played on the Turbo when I was a kid. I got it not too long ago when I got my TurboGrafx, like 5 or 6 years ago when I got it again. And I suck at it. I'm really bad at it because I'm really bad at 16-bit baseball games. But if you like 16-bit,
you need to get a bat attachment. That's the solution.
I don't know, man. If it's anything like my steering wheel experience, I don't think it's going to move the needle.
But I did want to point that out. It's a fun little sports game, and it's better than the TV sports series that came out on the system. So if you like sports, check that out. It's cute and it's fun. But the game I really want to highlight is Blazing Lasers. And of course, probably you've heard of Blazing Lasers, so this is kind of not going too deep into the well. It's kind of like saying, hey, check out Splatterhouse, because who hasn't heard of that? But Blazing Lasers is the game that when people say TurboGrafx, that is what defines TurboGrafx to me. It's a compile game. Who Compile's known for their shmups. They're known for the LS series. In fact, it's considered by a lot of people to be part of the Soldier series. And the Soldier series is another big TurboGrafx PC Engine series with a high quality. It's one of those games that is really easy to pick up and enjoy, especially for a shmup. It's great for noobs to get into, but it's hard to master. So it's not a cakewalk to the end, because once you get to the later levels, it really does ramp up in its difficulty. But the first couple levels, anyone can feel invincible. It has a diverse array of weapons that have different ways of attacking, just like any shmup would. But they all have their strengths and weaknesses that can be balanced out throughout the levels. Like there's 4 different types. They can be upgraded, of course. So it's very stereotypical kind of shmup. Like there's nothing there that's truly groundbreaking, but it's a vertical shooter for anyone who's not aware. It's a vertical shooter, not horizontal. But it's just so refined and so perfectly pulled off and so perfectly balanced that if anyone is ever interested in ever getting into shmups, I would feel confident saying that is the game that you give them. You don't give them, like, even beyond Life Force and Gradius, which I love. They're great games. But if someone's like, I don't know about shmups, they're just a little too hard, you give them Blazing Lasers, or in Japan it's known as Gunhead. And you say, try this out. Let me know what you think about it. And if they don't like that game, they're not going to like shmups. But if they do like it, you've introduced them to a whole nother world of addiction.
Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely.
I was going to say, like, I was going to make a comment about you saying, like, well, even beyond, like, Life Force, I would never hand somebody Life Force as their first shmup. Are you shitting me? That game is hard as balls.
And not with a turbo controller, it's not that bad. That's why you get the NES
that's called
advantage.
Cheating, Chris.
It's a first-party controller, Shane. It's fair.
No, not cheating.
No.
Life Force with a regular controller? Please, shoot me in the face.
No.
Oh my God.
And what kind of controllers does the TurboGrafx-16 come with? That's what I thought. I thought.
This explains a lot about why I owned Life Force for my NES and always could never get past like the first level because I just played it with a standard controller and it was the worst.
Should have used the
experience.
NES Advantage, Shane, or got an NES. You should have got the Sharp Twin Famicom with the turbo buttons on it, Shane. Then you could have played Life Force correctly. There you go.
Evidently, I have been doing it wrong all this time. But so I also
or just play it on the PC Engine.
Well, actually, yes, that is one thing I brought up to Chris in our Discord chat prior to this episode. Actually, was that I have experienced Life Force or Salamander, depending on your part of the world, the completely wrong way my entire life because I only ever played the NES version, and that's including sailing on the high seas and playing it that way. But man. The version of Life Force for the TurboGrafx is smooth. It is so smooth. Like I'm used to the major terrible game breaking slowdown that the NES version has, and it was like a whole different world playing it on this. So
nice.
I gotta say, man, there is a like night and day difference. Also, just for the record, don't want to let this go on too long, but I feel personally called out by Chris saying that Blazing Lasers is like the perfect game for shmup noobs, because this was also in my top 3 games, because I was like, man, out of all the shmups on this console, and it sure does have a lot, this one I felt like I could really get into because it wasn't really, really difficult. And now I just got called out.
There's no shame there, Shane.
No, I mean, I suck at shoot 'em ups. Like, I make no bones about that. I'm terrible at them. So being able to get through the first like 2 or 3 areas of Blazing Lasers and feel like a god is like great, comparatively speaking.
It's really important for pretty much any game to at least be able to get by the first few levels. If I might add as well, if you're looking, if you've picked up the Mini or what have you, or if you're looking to get into the TurboGrafx, another one that's really surprisingly approachable is Lords of Thunder. And that game,
I would say that's
kind of only gets
too easy.
Yeah, a little bit. And it really only ever gets talked about for its soundtrack, which, to be fair, is unbelievable. But that's another one, that you might toss in there. But you definitely would not go wrong with Blazing Lasers. So, man, just so good in so many ways.
The only knock I have on Lords of Thunder is that it's also a Sega CD game.
Yeah, fair enough.
By the way, honorable mention for soundtrack. And the game is good too, but specifically the soundtrack. And it's a HuCard game, and it's Devil's Crush.
Oh, yeah.
It's just one track. And that's the only track you ever need.
So, Chris, were there any others that were kind of in your top list that you just kind of wanted to give a quick shout out to, or?
I'm trying to think of ones that people don't really pay attention to. And I think the ones that people know about in general, like if you're interested in the TurboGrafx, a lot of those have really mostly been covered. Because I could say Ease Book 1 and 2. Yeah, a lot of people know about that.
Yeah, sure.
I could say Dracula X Rondo of Blood, but other than that, Air Zonk, people should check out Air Zonk. And the Sega games on the TurboGrafx, a lot of them, like, you should really go out and check out. They're really good ports. Outrun is a really good port. It's not as good as the Sega Genesis version, of course. But Space Harrier and Fantasy Zone are probably the definitive versions of that game until the 32-bit generation.
Absolutely. If I can throw Ninja Spirit in there, too, just as an honorable mention. Yeah.
Yes. That was actually one of the ones that I had a really hard time moving from my top 3, I'm going to be honest.
I'm not surprised.
Also, Parasol Stars.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. A lot of the work. In fact, working design started on the system. So if you like working designs and you like super expensive games just because it has a pink digital fading logo on it, then go nuts. Here's another system for you.
Yeah. Speaking of apparently super expensive games, Magical Chase also, anybody?
Get right on that.
Yeah.
It's a great game, though. It is a really good game.
It is.
It is.
It's still one of those super difficult shmups, though. Like, there's no bones about that. Like, don't let the cutesy art style fool you. Although if you play it on like the easy mode, you at least get. I actually got appreciably far in it doing it that way. So that's good, I guess. So real quick, a couple others that I just wanted to highlight without going into a whole lot of detail. My top 3 that I kind of settled on outside of Military Madness, of course, like I said, Blazing Lasers was one of the other ones that is pretty firmly in there. The other one that I ended up picking was actually Legendary Axe 2, not the first one. I actually, in my personal opinion, playing both of them, I felt like Legendary Axe 2 was a overall refinement of the first title in mostly all the right ways, and it just felt better to play. I felt like I got less cheap shots in it, and like I had a better sense of kind of like where my hitbox and by extension where like enemy hitboxes and those sorts of things were. So it just felt better. So I think that one kind of ended up in my top 3 as well. But outside of Magical Chase and Ninja Spirit, you guys brought those up. I had mentioned that I thought Dungeon Explorer should be a pack-in, so that's probably not too far of a stretch to assume that was an honorable mention of mine. And just because I want to throw Newtopia out there, because man, this game really wants to be Zelda. Like so hard.
Did that come out before Link to the Past? Because if it did, it was the best Zelda game at the time.
So I'm pretty sure that it did, and maybe Paul can keep me honest on that one, or you could.
I mean, I can't, but I'm reasonably sure that it did, just based on when the systems were released and so on. I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption.
Right, and so I had that same thought too. Is when I was playing it, I was like, okay. So this is basically taking this is like Link to the Past before Link to the Past. And it still, for the record, suffers from some of the weird problems that actually are the reason that I don't like the original Legend of Zelda, which we're going to be doing an episode on shortly. But yeah, I think actually at the time, that was probably the best Zelda game that wasn't Zelda.
It was the best Zelda game at the time.
Yeah. And also That's what that other episode is for. Don't you worry. But also, I didn't get a lot of time into it, but I plan on doing it after this episode, which is not timely at all. But I actually was kind of weirdly surprised with Dragon's Curse. That's a strangely fun little game.
That's an amazing game.
Yeah, I would say virtually all the games of that vintage, the Wonder Boy clones they're all very playable, very fun, and that one absolutely.
So Paul, any other kind of highlights you just wanted to call out real quick that you had on the list?
I'll throw out a game that's so bad it's good.
Excellent.
Which is It Came from the Desert, which is a CD game, and the actual gameplay part of it is, oh man, it is brutal, absolutely brutal. It's a side scroller, even if you want to call it that. But the fun of it lies in the FMV cutscenes and some of the mini games. They are hilarious. It's well worth playing just for that. Like, there's one scene, like one kind of mini game where there's a guy lying on the ground full screen and he's getting eaten by bugs, and you have to move a cursor around the screen and shoot the bugs, and the whole time he's like, whining, and oh man, it's hilarious.
I almost thought you were going to say JJ and Jeff, but that's a game that's so bad it's bad.
Yeah, no disagreement there.
I'm honestly trying to think of any games that relied heavily on FMV around that era that actually were good. I guess maybe Wing Commander.
Yeah,
that comes to mind.
I know we're really dragging this out, but I think that's one of the benefits of the PC CD compared to the Sega CD. Or the Turbo CD, however you want to call it, is that almost none of the CD games that came out relied, especially the ones that were advertised, relied on FMV.
Yeah, correct. They were just games that would have appeared on the TurboGrafx, but slightly beefed up and generally with excellent sound.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So, you know what? I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of running the length and breadth of the TurboGrafx topic. And as I said at the beginning, there is a whole lot to cover, and I am sure we did not touch on everything that we could have. So if there's something that, you'd want to hear us talk about again, we would, of course, absolutely love to have Paul back. Maybe we can do a part 2 on this if there's enough. But before I go into our abbreviated spiel that we usually do, Paul, first of all, thank you again for joining us. It has been a pleasure.
Oh man, pleasure was mine, honestly.
And where can the fine people out there find you and what you do?
Well, the fine people out there can find me hosting the Region Free Gamers podcast, along with my gaggle of co-hosts. There's 5 of us now. And you can find episodes at regionfreegamers.com or on iTunes, or I don't even think they call it iTunes anymore, but whatever, you know what I'm talking about. And if you want to reach out and chat with us, you can reach us on Instagram, Region Free Gamers Podcast.
Fantastic. And as far as we are concerned, if you're listening to the show, chances are you found us. So congratulations. So I'm not going to tell you where to find us because you're already here. But if you would like to check us out on our stream Sundays on Twitch, we would love to have you stop by. It is at 9 p.m. Eastern time. We're usually on for about an hour or two playing some retro game or another, usually related to whatever our most recent episode is. So please feel free to drop in and join our trusty patron, Lyle, in heckling us about literally everything, because I'm sure even though he enjoys doing it, he would love company. And speaking of that, we do have a Patreon. So if you like what we're doing and you'd like to support the show that way, please consider going over to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/RH and choose the donation tier that fits you. And if you donate at the 16-bit tier or above, you get access to our exclusive bonus audio content feed, which includes our rapid fire reviews and outtakes from the recording episodes, just like this one. So, Chris, do you have anything that you would like to say before we shut this thing down?
Yeah, if you're just finding us based off an old picture, yeah, we did get a new logo that should be up by the time this episode debuts. And we really like it. So if you like it, let us know. And if you don't like it, let us know, because, we're here for you guys.
All right. Well, in that case, with all that being said, until next time,
play with your turbo duoing joysticks.